Hello, my name is Edward Haletky. I'm from the virtualization practice, a virtualization security analyst for a number of years. I've written several books on the subject, and if you want to find those on Amazon, be my guest. I have actually been a VMware vExpert for 6 years, since the beginning, which is kind of cool. And today we're going to talk about how you should be using the VMware vSphere hardening guide. The guide came out, when did the guide come out? 2 years ago, a year ago? It's been a hardening guide since 4.0 days, but now it's in a spreadsheet format, which is actually a little easier to understand. Thank you. So we're going to take a look at the real guide. I'm not going to, doing slides for this is a pain. So the very first thing you need to realize about the hardening guide is, and if I can remember how to do this, as the security hardening guide is just that, a guide. It is not, you must adhere to this. It's a guide. If the security guide comes to you and gives you the hardening guide and says, implement this, you look and say, it's a guide, what would you like me to implement? Tell him he needs to do his job. Which means he needs to actually read it. And the most important things of the guide are actually in this introduction section. This is actually the most important part of it. Because why? It's a guide. It's going to tell you what it's covering. But the most thing that I like here is this. If I can highlight it, are your risk profiles. Every guide has a set of risks associated with it. Even if I'm doing, and I love the one that DISA did. By the way, anybody have to apply to DISA for the hardening guide? I'm sorry, I feel for both of you. Because they ignored this section. The risk profile is associated with each element. You need to pick the profile that's associated with your organization. You can't there and do everything. If you did everything, actually each profile is interwoven inside the guide, and some of them are mutually exclusive. You can't do all three profiles. You have to pick one to apply it. So you pick the one that's the most appropriate for your organization. You start here. And if someone says implement the guide, you can say, hey, this is what the guide says, which risk profile you want me to do. And they'll go, the most secure, of course. And you're going, okay, you want no access to your VMs, I can do that. No, but that's not how it works. So risk profile 3 is the one that most organizations are going to do. This is the one for every organization should do. This should be the base. So if you're given the hardened guide and you don't have any other instruction, minimally do this, please. That's the best thing. The next one is if you have to be slightly more secure. If you have to be slightly more secure, there's a lot more things you're going to have to do, a lot more decision points you're going to have to make. And the third one is for government organizations that absolutely need to lock down everything onto this, and you can't get into it. No, actually, you just have to lock it down and follow this guideline. Again, 3, 2, and 1, they're very much mutually exclusive. There's some rules for 3 that is for the same field is a different rule value for 2 and 1, and vice versa. That's why I say someone gives it to you and says, implement this, it's like, what do I implement? You need to know. So you got all that, and that's actually the most important part of this. Then you have some things that we've put in here that actually Mr. Foley put in here from VMware. He wrote this. Is the negative functional impact. This one's really important to understand. If you're going to be sitting inside of a rule or a guide line, it'll tell you what's the functional impact. If it's going to literally disconnect your storage, and none of them say this, thank God, you probably should know, right? If someone says implement it, you got to say, would you really want me to do this? That's the important part. The guide is just that, a guide. You have to take it, read it, understand it, and figure out if that really should be done. It doesn't say do this. This is a guideline. Okay? So let's take a look at some of these. And we're going to look at the VM one to start with, and somehow I got all the way over to, here we go. So this one's a fun one. I've been arguing about this one for years. Control resource usage. So what's it going to do? It applies to vSphere 5.5, virtual machines resources. Prevent virtual machines from taking over the resources. Does anybody know how to implement this? So if someone came and said, you must do this, what do you say? There are several ways you can approach this, and you need to start discussing how to approach these. If I want to control resource usage, the first thing I need to do is understand resource usage, which means I need capacity tools and performance management tools. Maybe I'm using part of VCOps, maybe I'm using something that's baked into vCenter, maybe I'm using a third-party tool. I need to measure it before I can control it. So that's a guideline that says, hey, I need to be able to say, are my VMs balanced? Effectively, is there a noisy neighbor? If there's a noisy neighbor, I need to figure that out. How do you figure that out? Do you have the right tools to actually even determine if this guideline applies? So now I have a guideline that says, oh, I need more tools, so what do? You write up saying, I have an exception to this, I need to buy more tools. You give it to security, and they say, oh, you must buy those tools. They go up and get money for it. You get the tools. Now you can control it. Or you may run some PowerShell scripts to get resource utilization and balance it. Or you may have DRS or a few other things. The hecklers are here. But this is also another one. Let's look at this one. And all of them are very similar. And by the way, here's the PowerShell commands you can run, which is really nice. But these are the negative functional impacts. So disable auto install. First thing I'm going to do is look at the negative functional impact. Is this something I want? The option disables tools auto install. So in other words, when VMware Tools gets updated, every time you do an upgrade of vSphere, VMware Tools gets updated. Do you want to be able to auto-install those VMware tools? If the answer is no, and you have 10,000 Linux VMs or 10,000 Windows VMs, do you want to do them all by hand? Personally, I don't. So I may not disable auto-install. However, there's another control you can get. There's a third-party tool that manages agents. So do you have that in play? If you do, then you would want to be able to disable it, because it would automatically install the agents and the tools for you and do the reboots and everything you need. So you need to be able to do, again, it's a guideline. Find out if there's a control you already have, a compensating control, determine if the negative functional impact is something you can live with. And if it is, you can say, okay, this is, from a profile perspective, a 1 and a 2. Notice it's not a 3. So if you are the general organization, you do not need to apply this. It's for the slightly more secure in the most secure environment. So the guideline says, we don't believe this is for everybody. It's not for everybody. That means, is it really for me? Right? So you got to really go through each one of these individually and figure out, is this really for me? And this one's actually kind of interesting because it's extremely easy to set. It's an auto-install disable. It's inside the VMX tool, the VMX file. And there's a nice little PowerShell script you can run to set it right there. So I can set it for all the VMs automatically just running a simple PowerShell script. Now there are some tools that do this automatically, by the way. But this is a guideline. It says, do I need to do it? Or do I have another compensating control that says, yes, I can lock it down and use some other tool to manage my 10,000 VMs? Think scale. If you're running a small environment with 10 or 20 VMs and you're used to doing things by hand, that's fine. All the power to you. If I have 10,000 VMs, I do nothing by hand. Everything's scripted. So I need to have a tool that'll be able to do that, or I write a tool myself. There's a lot of these. These are all the ones that you can do. Every one of these, the same thing. So let's go over to this one here. Disable inter-VM VMCI. Now this one's interesting. It's for all of them. But you got to also look at this one as a different rule. If you're using EPSec version 2, which is endpoint security, and that's what Trend Micro uses, and Symantec uses, and Kaspersky uses, and ESET uses, and you're using them, inter-VM VMCI, you should disable. But you should not disable VMCI to the VMware kernel, because it'll stop that from working. So these are the things you need to think about. It's a guideline. Know your product, which means in order to apply some of these, you really need to understand how that particular product works.
That's now disabled by default.
It's now disabled by default. This is now disabled by default, which means for EPSec version 2, you got to enable it, which is not good. But these are all the things that you need to think about. Think about your environment. Think about the tools you're using. Think about this as a guideline, not as you must do it. Okay? And if we look, there's some other resources you can go to. And I'm just going to end this, and that did not take the right one. There we go. I write on the virtualization practice. I have a book out there that actually covers a lot of these rules and why you would need them, and a lot more detail that's inside of some of these. And the settings and all the reasons between DISA and CIS security in the hardening guide. Looks at all that. And I run the Virtualization Security Podcast, which we've talked about this a number of times. Just remember, it is a guide. Not carved in stone anywhere. And if anybody says it's carved in stone, you can tell them, talk to me, I'll be glad to talk to them, or Mike Foley down in the front. We'll gladly talk to them and disabuse them of that notion. Thank you.